Hey everyone, my name is Prince, and happy Christmas to you all. It isn't Christmas for me yet, obviously, because I can't record this on Christmas Day and get it uploaded on Christmas Day. But if you've taken the time out of your Christmas to watch this video, then first off, thank you very much. And second off, I hope you guys are having or have had a brilliant Christmas. And I'll be happy to talk to you guys about all of your Christmases as well as my Christmas if you tune in to the final live stream of the year, which is this Friday at 8 PM GMT. It'll just be a quiet Minecraft stream so we can chill out and chat to one another to end off the year. But just like last year, if you're watching this on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, or 5 months in the future, I hope you all have or had a great Christmas. And hey, even if you're watching this in like several years' time, I hope the last Christmas that you had was good. Now, I did intend to have a different video for Christmas Day this year, but plain and simple, I sort of ran out of time to make it. It was going to be a pretty cool Max Steel video, but I'll save that for next year when I can actually put the time into making it as good as I want it to be. So that's something you guys have to look forward to next year, but in the meantime, we're back talking about the Polar Express again. Because in the previous video that I released yesterday, for me, I talked about the overarching lore of the Polar Express and basically came up with a lore-based explanation for all of the batshit crazy stuff that happens in the movie. But in that video, I actually mentioned that I was leaving something out to make a separate video on, and that is the only confirmed lore of the Polar Express. And that is a deleted scene that reveals the origins of the Hobo. Now, the reason I left this topic out of the original video is because the main purpose of the original video was more to come up with lore to make the events of the Polar Express make sense. Whereas the Hobo's origins was actually something that was going to be in the movie, and thus I thought it sort of deserved a separate video. So in this video, we're going to be talking about everything that the deleted scene tells us about the Hobo, and also how that fits into the lore that we came up with in the last video. Now, this deleted scene can be viewed online. It's on YouTube. Just search up Polar Express deleted scene and it will be the first one. And you definitely won't miss it because the thumbnail is horrifying. The reason it looks like this is because the animation itself was never finalized and it was sort of scrapped in the Michelin Man phase, which is where they were using really basic movement and 3D models to sort of block out the scene. But basically, this deleted scene takes place directly after Chris falls into the engine room following the flat top tunnel scene with the Hobo. During this scene, Smokey and Steamer are not at the front of the train trying to replace the lamp, but instead return to the engine room to fix some steam issues after Hero Girl, who I actually learned after filming the last video is actually named Molly, with her name also being revealed in the art book of the Polar Express, which I kind of want to get my hands on now. But basically, this is an alternate version of the scene where Molly is unsure as to which lever is the brake, and instead of Smokey and Steamer replacing the lamp and then looking up to see the caribou in the distance, followed by Chris hitting the brakes, it's actually that some stuff goes wrong in the engine room and the whole place fills with steam, and Smokey and Steamer return to the engine room to fix it. Now, this is followed by the two of them singing a song called It Takes Two, which is basically their way of explaining that the Polar Express needs to be driven by two people and not just one. Now, I've got to be honest, I am really glad they cut this out because while the animation is not finalized, I assume the audio and the dialogue probably is. And I gotta be honest, Smokey and Steamer's dialogue, not just in the song but in the entirety of the scene, is really bad. And it's a real shame too because both of these characters were played by Michael Jeter, who unfortunately actually passed away during the making of the Polar Express. So these two characters were actually his last performance, and obviously I mean no disrespect to him because in all of their other scenes, and obviously they don't have that many scenes, the two of them, but in all of the other scenes they have, those two characters are actually really enjoyable to watch. But in this scene, they sort of both talk over each other constantly, and it makes both of their dialogue really difficult to understand, both in the song and just when they're talking normally. So I am glad that this scene was deleted, because not only does it sort of break up the pacing of the movie, the dialogue itself is actually really difficult to understand, and you spend the whole scene basically trying to decipher what the two of them are saying. But regardless, they sing the song, and then they turn to Chris and question how he got into the engine room. And Chris reveals that he was taken there by the king, meaning of course the king of the North Pole, the Hobo. Now when he mentions the king, Smokey and Steamer are incredibly shocked. They run out the engine room and pull down a blind and begin to act out a shadow show revealing the origins of the Hobo. Now due to the weird overlapping dialogue of the two characters, this scene is actually really difficult to understand, which sort of ruins the whole scene, because it's obviously meant to be us being told literally the only bit of story that even resembles lore in the entire movie, and you can barely understand what they're saying. So I took the liberty of writing down everything they say in this scene, and I did have to watch it multiple times to understand some of the things they said. And as someone whose entire job revolves around entertaining people by talking, let's see if I can retell this story a little bit clearer. So sit back and relax, everyone, because this is the legend of the King of the North Pole. Fade to black and cue the music. It was the night before Christmas, in the year 33, when this hobo named King decided he wanted to ride for free. He was riding on the roof, this king of the pole, when it started to fall, that white stuff called snow. The engine started down this steep icy drop, headed toward a tunnel called Flat Top. The train as it made toward the tunnel moved faster, and the king got nervous, cause up ahead was disaster. He didn't have time to holler, he had no time to cry. He got stripped off this train like snow off a Georgia swamp in July. His ghost still rides this train, some people believe, every year at Christmas, every Christmas Eve. So ladies and gentlemen, in one single scene we get the entire backstory of the Hobo. On Christmas Eve 1933, the Hobo, whose actual name is King, decided he wanted to ride the Polar Express for free. And he was riding on the roof up until they got to Flat Top Tunnel, where because of the tunnel's low clearance, he was knocked off the train and killed. So with the actual lore revealed in this scene explored, now we can get on to the fun stuff, and we can actually start talking about what this means. Now first and foremost, as I actually mentioned briefly in the previous video in reference to this deleted scene and the lore it reveals to us, this lore, which obviously was going to be in the movie before they cut it, actually lends itself to the side of the theory that supports the Polar Express not being a dream and actually being real. Because as we actually discussed in the last video, the main theory behind the whole everything is a dream idea was that the Hobo and the Conductor represent two alternate futures for Chris, and the Hobo represents the person that Chris would have turned into if he had stopped believing in Santa and Christmas permanently. But if the filmmakers intended there to be an actual backstory for the Hobo where he was an actual person that died, that sort of throws that theory out the window, because it suggests that he was originally an actual person. So let's go back and talk about the lore that I discussed in the previous video and how the Hobo sort of fits into that. And again, if you haven't watched that video, then I would advise going back and watching it, because most of the stuff that I'm going to be saying from this point onward won't make a lot of sense if you haven't seen that video. Now in the previous video, I basically didn't mention the Hobo at all once we'd moved on from the whole it's all a dream idea. And again, that's mainly due to the fact that I wanted to do a whole video talking about his lore. And mentioning him in that video without exploring knowing all of the things I've talked about in this video thus far would have been a bit pointless. But in the last video, I talked about how the conductor that we see in the movie was most likely not the first, because he mentioned his first run on the Polar Express years ago. But while in the last video I talked about him mentioning his first run, in this video I'm actually going to be talking about what he was actually talking about when he was referencing that. And that was the fact that on his first run, when he slipped off the train, he didn't fall off it because he was saved by something. And I think we all know that that something was King. So that obviously means that on the conductor's first ever Christmas Eve run, King's ghost was already there on the train. So that sort of supports the theory that the Polar Express has been around a long time, longer than just this one conductor, and supports the idea that there were probably many more before him. So that's one thing. Obviously we know that King died in 1933, and presumably from that point onwards, his ghost haunted the train. But from this at least, we know that the conductor we meet in the movie was not the first, because King had clearly died before this conductor had arrived, and thus, obviously the Polar Express has existed since before this conductor, because King's ghost was already a thing when he started his runs. The second thing I find interesting about the lore of King is that Flat Top Tunnel is actually mentioned. Now you may be wondering why I'm making a big deal out of that. Well, basically, if you didn't see the previous video, to sum it up, my theory is that the Polar Express and the North Pole exist in a sort of alternate world. An alternate magical world that the children are chosen to be seamlessly teleported into to travel to the North Pole to learn a lesson and help them. And I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more a little bit later. But first of all, in the previous video, I theorized that the route for the Polar Express may actually change every single time. Because obviously the children that we see traveling in the Polar Express in the movie all seem to be from America. And I highly doubt that it's just American children that are in need of the Polar Express's guidance. But the fact that they mention that King died at Flat Top Tunnel confirms that at least once before, the Polar Express has traveled this same route. Now this could mean a number of things. It could mean that the Polar Express starts off in different locations around the world when it's picking up the children, but when it's finished picking up all the children, all of the different tracks all around the world that it rides on connects to this one route. The route with Flat Top Tunnel, Glacier Gulch, and all of the other landmarks we see during the movie. Again, I talked about how in the last video, time and space don't seem to work the same way they do in our world, so it could be that the route after the Polar Express has picked up all of the children remains the same every single time and seamlessly connects to all of the different replicated locations that the Polar Express picks up children from. Or alternatively, it could mean that the Polar Express does indeed travel a different route every single year, but this year in particular, it happened to travel along the same route where King was killed. Now, what that means, I'm not entirely certain. It could mean nothing at all. It could just be a coincidence that they happen to be traveling the same route. But again, there seem to be a few abnormalities when it comes to this specific journey of the Polar Express. Now again, we don't really have any context as to what a regular journey on the Polar Express looks like, but there's just a few things here and there that sort of make me think that this isn't a regular journey. First off, the whole thing about the ice having frozen over the tracks during the whole ice lake scene, and I talked about that in the previous video, and that was one of my main sort of pieces of evidence for the route being different each year, in that how and why would you build a track over a lake on a route that you're traveling in winter every single year? But also a quote from the know-it-all kid when Billy is about to get on the train, because he says, "Oh, it's just another pickup," and then he turns to Chris and says, "That's weird. I thought you were supposed to be the last one." And since I first watched the movie, that line has always seemed very mysterious. Because first off, how does the know-it-all kid know anything about the Polar Express's schedule when it's a magical train shrouded in mystery? But second off, if Chris was supposed to be the last child, then what's the deal with Billy? Because we discussed in the last video about how thanks to that quote from the conductor, we sort of know that there is apparently some sort of boss of the Polar Express. Someone who is above the conductor, who is apparently calling the shots, and probably sets out a list of children who are going to be chosen to ride on the Polar Express. So if Billy wasn't on the list originally, what's the deal with him? Was he like a last minute addition? What's going on with him? I honestly don't know. Honestly, that could probably be a whole other video in itself. Let me know if you guys want to see more videos on the Polar Express in the future, because having come up with all of this lore, I'm sort of discovering that there's actually quite a lot to talk about. But anyway, whether or not this particular journey was anything special, I'm not entirely sure. That could be a topic for another video. All we know is that the route we see the Polar Express travel in the movie is the same one that it traveled on the night that King died. So we know that at least once before, if not every year, the Polar Express has traveled this route before. But now, it's time to get into what I see as the most interesting thing that this lore tells us. From the lore revealed to us in this deleted scene, we know that King was originally a real person. He was a hobo that rode without a ticket on the Polar Express's route. He ended up getting killed, and now his ghost haunts the train. But there's actually something really interesting about the fact that King was originally a real person that rode on the Polar Express. And that's the fact that, as far as we know, the only people that can ride on the Polar Express are children. And not just children, only specific children who are seemingly chosen to ride on the Polar Express. So if that's the case, then how did King even get on the Polar Express? Because he is, as far as we know, the only adult who has ever gotten on the Polar Express. Because in order to get on the Polar Express, you can't just hop on, you have to be chosen. We know that it's only specific children who are chosen to ride on the Polar Express, and it's specifically those that are in need of help. They need to be taught something to help them develop as people. So how the hell did a random hobo get on the magical train that only chooses who rides on it? Or the higher-ups choose who rides on it, you know what I mean. Well, I see three possible explanations for this. Number one is that somehow King was able to, I guess, hijack the magic of the Polar Express. How he did that, I could not even begin to guess, but maybe he was somehow able to summon the Polar Express, but then again, that would involve him knowing about the Polar Express already. Maybe King actually rode on the Polar Express as a child, but maybe something went wrong, maybe he just never learnt his lesson, or maybe he got kicked off. Maybe he was like a particularly bad child and he actually got kicked off of the Polar Express. Maybe he was even the only child who ever got kicked off the Polar Express. And then as an adult, being aware of the Polar Express, he was somehow able to summon it again and get on it. And when he ended up dying because he was riding on the roof without a ticket, breaking the rules of the Polar Express, I guess the magic of the Polar Express sort of punished him by binding his soul to the train so he would have to ride it for eternity. Or maybe he would have to ride it until he learned his lesson. Maybe he was cursed to ride the train and see all of these children, learning their lesson, and when he learned his lesson and learned to believe in Christmas again, then his spirit would finally be free. Because the whole thing about ghosts is that more often than not, they remain in the mortal world because they have unfinished business. But I think it's pretty plausible that King could actually be cursed to ride the Polar Express until he learns his lesson. Now, whether or not he actually learns his lesson during the movie that we see, I'm not entirely certain. Obviously, we see him fade away at the end of the movie, but he does that several times throughout the movie, so I'm not entirely sure. Although we do obviously see him helping Chris at several different points throughout the movie, so I don't know what we're meant to take from that. Whether he's just, taken a liking to Chris and doesn't want to see him dead. Or maybe he sees something of himself in Chris about his sort of hesitation to believe in Christmas and Santa. Or maybe deep down he actually sees a chance at redemption in Chris, and trying to help him get to the North Pole to see Santa is him finally trying to learn his lesson and redeem himself. But all of that was just one idea. Santa. The second idea is a little bit more out there. We discussed in the previous video the concept of the Polar Express going somewhere once it's finished its journey, and that potentially there could be some magical, mystical station at the end of the line where it remains for the rest of the year until it does its next journey. But what if it's not just a station, but there's like an entire civilization at the end of the line within this magical world? And the Hobo could just be someone from that civilization who is obviously aware of the magic of the Polar Express that hopped on the train before it left the station. And again, that could be really interesting, that there could be like an entire civilization of people who are aware of the Polar Express and belong in the same magical world as it, the same as all the elves in the North Pole. But again, that theory is a little bit more out there, and I don't really have as much evidence for that. But the third and final theory is really interesting. What if King is actually the reason that the Polar Express exists? Now, what I mean specifically by this is, what if King's death was actually the catalyst for the creation of everything? The Polar Express, the North Pole, the entirety of the magic that surrounds the Polar Express, the magical world that it resides within, everything. Because let's look back at what we know about King. We know that his entire personality is based on the fact that he is bitter and that he doesn't believe in Christmas. So in 1933, on Christmas Eve, a night which is usually filled with, positivity, because it's the night before Christmas and, everyone's excited to wake up in the morning and unwrap presents and spend time with your family and everything like that, rode on a train, not the Polar Express, just a train, breaking the rules by riding on the rooftop and not buying a ticket. And his death was such a violation of everything that Christmas stands for, it created all of this. The horror of his death, mixed with the fact of him being a bitter person who does not believe in Christmas, was such a crime against the pure purpose of Christmas that it created something that would ensure that no one would ever suffer the same fate again. A magical train that would take kids that needed help on a journey to ensure that they would always believe in Christmas, and that they would never suffer the same fate of dying alone and bitter on Christmas. Which could mean that originally Santa, the elves, the North Pole, all of it was not actually real. But the necessity for something to help people believe in Christmas again actually made it real. The tragedy of King dying alone and bitter on Christmas manifested itself in a magical experience that would mean that no children would ever suffer his fate again. And honestly, I really like that theory, and it still lines up with everything I've talked about in these two videos. It's just that he is the reason it all exists. His death created everything to do with the Polar Express, the alternate world, the North Pole, the Polar Express itself, everything. And as something I meant to mention earlier, maybe the Polar Express is actually like a replica of the train that King actually died on all those years ago. And the reason I really like this as the idea of the sort of origin of the Polar Express is because it's sort of symbolic of the same message of the movie itself, to believe in Christmas. And this origin being exactly the same as the meaning of the movie is really fitting and honestly pretty nice. And who knows, maybe one day King will stop being this bitter and resentful man and actually start believing in Christmas again. Because while in the movie he does try to convince Chris that Santa isn't actually real, he himself must know that Santa is real because he's riding on the Polar Express, which goes to the North Pole where Santa is. And it's not like he's not able to go to the North Pole, because we actually see him at the North Pole still helping out Chris. So regardless of what he says to Chris, I think it's actually Christmas that he doesn't believe in, rather than Santa. And again, it's sort of unclear as to whether or not him remaining physical in the world is his choice, or whether or not he sort of flickers in and out of reality inconsistently. Because obviously, he himself is actually a physical person when he's within the mortal world, but he just disappears every now and then. So whether or not he's actually in control of that disappearance, or he can only stay in the mortal world for a certain amount of time, I don't really know. And I was gonna say that maybe if he started believing in Christmas again, he could actually join the crew of the Polar Express. But if his resentment of Christmas is what's keeping him tethered to the Polar Express and to the mortal world, then I imagine if he ever stopped being resentful and actually finally let all of that hate go, he would probably actually pass on and stop being a ghost and his spirit would be free. But even if by the end of the movie that we see, he didn't let go of his resentment, I'd like to think that watching Chris go on this journey actually put him on that path if he wasn't on there already. And seeing Chris, a kid who at the start was very unsure and hesitant to believe in Christmas, go on this journey with his help and learn to believe in Christmas again, set King the Hobo on the path to believing in Christmas again himself. But anyway, I really hope you guys did enjoy this video and this pair of videos talking about the lore of the Polar Express. If you don't want to miss any future videos just like this one or any of my live streams, then go down into the description down below and join the casual Discord, and you'll be automatically notified whenever I upload a video or go live. And of course, a like, comment, and subscribe is highly appreciated. Apart from the best of 2024, which should be coming by the end of the year, hopefully, this will be my final proper video of the year, so I hope you guys have a fantastic Christmas and a fantastic rest of 2024. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, seeing is believing, and sometimes the realest things in the world are the things we can't see. Again, thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I will see you on another video or stream very, very soon. Goodbye, everyone, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year.